Hi, and welcome to today's current news. Today is Wednesday, April 24th, 2024. Millions of women are under-muscled. These foods help build strength. If you've seen a loved one take a bad fall, like my mother did a few months ago, you know the importance of muscle strength. Muscle mass peaks in our 30s and then starts a long, slow decline. Muscle loss, also called sarcopenia, affects more than 45% of older Americans, especially women. As a country, we are under-muscled, said Richard Joseph, a wellness-focused physician. It's a key culprit to a physical decline. Loss of strength increases the risk of falling, the top cause of death from injury in older adults. The Office on Women's Health recently launched a sarcopenia awareness campaign to elevate the issue. The good news: no matter your age, you can take steps to maximize your strength. Resistance training is key, but equally important is eating adequate amounts of protein. If you don't consume enough protein, you're missing half of the equation, says nutrition and exercise scientist Rachel Pojedic, a researcher at Stanford Lifestyle Medicine. But millions of older women in the U.S. don't consume enough protein, research shows. Protein is critically important because it's in all our cells, including muscle cells, and our proteins constantly recycle it. That there's a steady demand for new supplies, and protein-rich foods provide the amino acids that become the building blocks of the new proteins our bodies need. As we age, the goal is to consume protein from food at a faster rate than our body is breaking it down. When you add in resistance training, this will help maintain muscle mass, Pojendik says. How much is enough? The recommended intake is a minimum of 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. That's about 0.36 grams of protein multiplied by your weight in pounds. That means a person who weighs 150 pounds should consume at least 54 grams of protein a day. But many experts say more is optimal. As we age, protein needs to increase. And if you are exercising a lot, which is the way to build new muscle, you may benefit from even more. Sports medicine recommend up to 1.7 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight each day for people who are actively training, which is about 115 grams for a 150-pound person. Most young adults tend to consume the recommended amount of protein, but later in life, a study from 2019 found about 30% of men in their 50s and 60s fall short, and nearly half of women aged 50 and older do. As part of my project on healthy aging, I decided to up my protein intake. I was advised to aim for 90 grams of protein each day, which at first I found challenging. So I asked experts to share some key foods and strategies to help pack more protein into my meals. Here are some ideas. Breakfast: 1/4 cup of pumpkin seeds, approximately 8 grams of protein. Strawberry, less than 1 gram of protein. 3/4 cup of Greek yogurt, approximately 17 grams of protein. 1/4 cup of pecans, approximately 2.5 grams of protein. The Greek yogurt with fruit and nuts and seeds is approximately 28 grams of protein. 1. Amp up your morning bowl of Greek yogurt. At about 17 grams per 3/4 cup serving, Greek yogurt is a great source of protein. You can eat it plain, add sweet or savory toppings, or throw it into a smoothie. It's super versatile and high in casein protein, which is slow to digest, which keeps you full while also promoting muscle protein synthesis, which is the process of building muscle mass, Pojendik says. 2. Eggs are an easy way to get protein on the go. At 6 grams of protein for a large egg, hard-boiled eggs are a go-to option. If you hard-boil a dozen eggs and keep them in the refrigerator, they're ready to grab and go. And whether you like scrambled or poached, eating an egg in the morning or as a mid-morning snack can hold you to lunch. The U.S. dietary guidelines say an egg a day won't raise heart attack risk in healthy people, but some people may need to limit eggs due to cholesterol concerns. 3. Power up your smoothies with powdered protein. If you've got a blender and some fruits and veg on hand, you're ready to go. We have a big smoothie game in our house, Joseph says. I love smoothies. My kids love smoothies, he says. And it's easy to add extra protein by blending in a scoop of protein powder. Whey protein powder, which is derived from the cheese-making process when whey and curds are separated. It has all of the essential amino acids our bodies need, and it's another great option for high protein on the go. I like to buy big bags of frozen berries for my smoothies and toss in spirulina, an algae that's high in protein. Also, if my bananas and greens are getting too ripe, I add them so they don't go to waste. This lunch is a tuna salad bowl. It has approximately 39 grams of protein. Half an apple is less than 1 gram of a protein. 4-ounce can of tuna is approximately 20 grams of protein. 2 cups of spinach are approximately 2 grams of protein. 1 ounce of grated Parmesan cheese is approximately 10 grams of protein. Half a cup of garbanzo beans, approximately 7 grams of protein. 4. Add some tuna to your salad. Fish is chock-a-block full of protein. Cod has approximately 40 grams per serving, and salmon and tuna both have approximately 30 grams. And Rochelle Pogenick says fish is an excellent source of unsaturated rather than saturated fat, so that's a plus for heart health. One super simple option is to toss a can of string tuna over a bed of greens. Then add fruit and nuts for crunch. And voila, you've hit your protein target. 5. Sprinkle in protein with nuts and seeds. Nuts and seeds tend to be about the same or even better in the protein category than legumes. So try sprinkling them on salads and rice bowls. Pogent says, hemp and pumpkin seeds both have around 8 grams for a 1/4 cup serving. And you can add them as healthy crunchies on top of yogurt, oatmeal, salads, or bowls, she says. Pumpkin seeds also contain plenty of magnesium, beneficial for heart health. 6. Meat in small doses adds a protein punch. Meat is a top source of protein, serving up about 7 grams of protein per ounce, and many dietitians say to aim for lean cuts, such as chicken breast or lean ground turkey. But as many people aim to cut back, there are plenty of plant-based alternatives. A new study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition this month finds adequate protein intake in midlife, especially plant protein, is linked to significantly higher odds of healthy aging. A dinner. Roasted eggplant and black bean stuffing is approximately 33 grams of protein. 1 cup of eggplant is less than 1 gram of protein. Half a cup of black beans is approximately 8 grams of protein. 1 cup of cooked lentils is approximately 18 grams of protein. 1 cup of farro, approximately 6.5 grams of protein. And the salad mix adds vitamins and potassium. 7 ways to eat tofu and beans. 7. Tasty ways to eat tofu and beans. Lentils and chickpeas are 2 of my favorite plant protein sources, which are delicious on their own or in curries and soups. You can also cook up a pot full and keep them in the fridge ready to add salads. There's also tofu and edamame, which are affordable and available at most supermarkets. Lesser known options include tempeh, soy base, which comes in at approximately 18 to 20 grams of protein per serving. Here's a hack to prevent tofu mush. I sprinkle a little cornstarch on diced tofu and pan fry it, which makes it crispy on the outside. Then I toss in sauces such as peanut sauce or pesto. 8. Don't miss out on higher protein grains. I love the nutty taste and chewy texture of farro, an ancient grain that's won over a lot of fans. It's easy to cook. Just toss the grain into boiling water and let it simmer. A few cups makes enough for several meals. At twice the protein, it's an awesome swap for rice, Podegenic says. And farro also has a lot more fiber. Quinoa is another good option. It has approximately 8 grams of protein per cup. 9. Don't forget veggies. Vegetables are not the main players when it comes to protein, but they can add a few grams. For instance, a cup of broccoli contains about 2.6 grams, and greens and colorful vegetables contain many beneficial vitamins, micronutrients, and antioxidant compounds, which are good for health. Eating a salad a day is linked to a sharper memory, too. So keep a bowl of chopped vegetables to snack on and blend into salads, stews, and soups. Do women-only co-working spaces have a future? Women-only businesses, networking and co-working clubs like Chief in London and the co-working space in Nottingham have recently closed their doors. The concept gained a lot of traction around the height of the Me Too movement. Some women find the idea a step backwards, but for others, these clubs are a way to level the playing field. The idea of men-only gentlemen's clubs is well established, with century-old places like White's and the Garrick Club in London. But women-only ones have been on the rise too over the past decade, often with a twist. They focus on the idea of co-working. Co-working spaces are big, open-plan offices with hot desks and nice amenities where people can come and work on membership basis. They have grown in popularity as remote working has become easier. Women-only co-working spaces hit the headlines about 8 years ago thanks to the Wing in the U.S. It was founded in New York by Audrey Gilman. former press secretary to Hillary Clinton, against the backdrop of the Me Too movement and Donald Trump's rise to power. It raised millions in funding with the promise of female empowerment. But then it suffered a spectacular fall during the pandemic. There was a staff revolt with the allegations of mistreatment and racism. Its pricing model led to accusations of social exclusivity. It was also hit by legal challenges for sexual discrimination over its core women-only membership policy. The self-proclaimed Female Utopia abruptly closed all of its spaces in the summer of 2022, including a branch in London. Despite the demise of the wing, other women-only co-working spaces are still operating. There are about 50 in Europe, including several in the UK. One such place is the Hearth in North London. Bonnie Lister Parsons, founder of SOS Dance Global, a digital platform that teaches women how to dance, is a regular. So why is she a member? It's been challenging growing her business as a woman. She explains as only about 2% of venture capital funding goes to female-led companies. When you're operating in a world with a lot of headwinds, being in all-female space is refreshing and joyful, she says. She also says she wasn't impressed by her tour of the co-working space WeWork, where they have been to boast about the free beer on tap. For the guy showing me around, it was a massive selling point. I know not all women dislike beer, but personally, I couldn't care less. Audrey Gilman, founder of The Wing, used to argue that rival co-working spaces have had pumps for beer, but not for breast milk. The Hearth is designed to feel like your dream home. According to its founder, Oi Lei, the walls and furnishing are relaxing. Pastel colors and an aromatic smell is pumped into the space for women hot desk. There is even a wellness room. Susie Campbell, a business advisor and coach, is another regular. I used to work in the city for many years, a very male-dominated environment, she explains. The air conditioning was always down too low. There's something just really safe here, and a sense of community. There are a handful of other women-only co-working spaces in the UK, including Egg in Edinburgh and Maven in Winchester, a former bridal shop where the owner decided to convert. Zoe Ellis Moore is the founder of Spaces to Places, which advises companies on how to find the most flexible office space. Women-only co-working spaces should be seen as part of a wider trend of people wanting to work flexibly in tribes, she says. We've seen a huge growth in these niche areas, she says, like spaces for tech startups or flexible catering spaces for hospitality companies. Startups and freelancers want to work flexibly, but the community of like-minded people, she points out, and women-only spaces represents a tribe, just like these. Gender discrimination. In 2017, the New York Commission on Human Rights launched an investigation into the Wing over the issue of gender discrimination, and the following year, a man filed a lawsuit against the Wing in Washington, D.C. after he was refused admission. The Wing adapted its membership rules to say that anyone could join, as long as they were committed to its mission of supporting women. Other women-only spaces in the U.S. followed suit. The Coven in Minnesota started in 2018 as a women-only space after a successful crowdfunding campaign and now has 4 spaces. It has 1,000 members, but men now make up about 20% of that figure. We were hearing from members that they wanted to invite more of their male friends into the space, says Erin Farrell, a co-founder of the Coven, which led us to think, when we talk about physical and psychological safety, how tied to gender is that? Ms. Farrell says they were aware of the legal challenges the Wing was facing, but their own language never excluded men. It was always just women-focused, so accepting men was not a significant issue. Those who chose to join tend to be allies and accomplices, she adds, and the club's amenities and program of events remain women-focused. So where does this leave women-only spaces in the UK? Equality legislation in the UK, enshrined in the Equality Act, generally protects against discrimination based on gender in the supply of services, according to the Sarah Evans Partner of Constantine Law, which specializes in the employment and discrimination law, but there are exceptions including for associations, groups, and private clubs. Criteria apply. but women only co-working groups with the aim of supporting and facilitating women doing business together are highly unlikely to fall foul of anti-discrimination laws, she says. A step back. The other present question is, are these spaces empowering women in the long term? Some workplace experts are not convinced. While women-only spaces can provide temporary relief from conflict, judgment, assumptions, and distractions, says Blair Palmer, leadership consultant and author of Punk'd in Suit, it is vital that we all learn how to challenge each other and develop the skills to bring our unique perspective to work. Women-only spaces are useful for exploring in a safer environment, and the challenges of being a woman in what is still not a level playing field, but they should never become a place to hide permanently. However, others think that women-only work clubs are counterproductive. Women-only co-working spaces are a step backwards, according to Ann Kirby, who set up the Candy Factory co-working in Pennsylvania. Yes, women have unique challenges and are at a disadvantage in the business world. But how does removing yourself from real life get you anywhere? How can we expect men to understand the need for respect and equality if we subtract them from our daily work lives? We're working to disrupt the good old boys club mentality. Why create the same thing for women? Back downstairs at the hearth, a lunch and learn workshop is taking place. The women who are working away on their laptops are now sitting in a square listening to a talk by Elena Megan, a self-discovery and mindset coach. An audience member shares a story that perhaps explains the attraction of a women-only co-working space like this for some. She says she has always struggled to network with men because she feels they do not treat her like an equal professional. The other members nod and murmur in agreement. Talks for a plastic pollution treaty are stalling. Could the U.S. be doing more? Negotiators from about 175 countries have been sparring for more than a year over a treaty to clean up plastic pollution that's choking rivers and piling up in landfills. As a critical new round of deliberations starts this week in Canada, the talks are floundering. Some scientists and civil society groups say the United States bears a lot of the blame. Almost every piece of plastic is made from fossil fuels, and major oil and natural gas producers like Russia and Saudi Arabia have been widely criticized for throwing up roadblocks in the negotiations. However, scientists and environmentalists following the talks say the U.S. exerts outsized influence on the process. The country is the top producer of oil and gas globally, and it has the world's biggest economy, which has historically given the U.S. huge sway in environmental negotiations. So far, American negotiators have been unwilling to push for measures in the treaty that would drive big cuts in plastic waste. Critics say, like caps on manufacturing. Instead, they say U.S. government representatives have put their weight behind policies around recycling and waste management that are favored by the country's giant fossil fuel and petrochemical industries. Researchers say those actions on their own won't drastically reduce plastic pollution. I don't think it's an understatement to say that we're headed at right now with progress in negotiations is towards failure. And if there's one country that I think is responsible for that, I think it's the United States, says Douglas McCauley, a professor of environmental science at University of California, Santa Barbara, who has consulted with the U.S. State Department about the treaty and is attending the talks in Ottawa. NPR spoke to 7 scientists and environmental advocates who have consulted with the U.S. government about the plastic negotiations, some multiple times. Many of those experts contend that an absence of U.S. leadership is hindering efforts to push forward a treaty with effective regulations. The outcome of the negotiations could have big implications for human health. A recent study found plastics contain more than 4,200 hazardous chemicals, the vast majority of which aren't regulated globally, according to the researchers. It's not that the U.S. is actively opposing some of these policies that could make a difference, Macaulay says. It's that they are showing no action whatsoever, no ambition whatsoever for adopting any of these policies. In a letter to President Biden in March, a coalition of more than 300 scientists said policy recommendations the government received from plastic manufacturers and the government's own stance in the talks to the date are inconsistent with efforts to deal comprehensively with plastic waste. And a group of the 9 Democratic attorneys general whose states are grappling with plastic pollution, recently urged the U.S. treaty delegation to back stronger global rules, saying the country is uniquely positioned to influence the negotiations. There is an important role the U.S. could play in addressing the growing influence of industry on these negotiations, says Carol Moffett, chief executive of the Center for International Environmental Law, who is an observer at the negotiations and whose organization has consulted with the State Department about the treaty. So far, we have yet to see the U.S. on the right side of that issue. A State Department spokesperson said that in a statement to NPR that U.S. officials met with a wide set of stakeholders ahead of the negotiations in Canada, and the country has a central role in bridging differing positions in the talks. For an agreement to be effective, it needs to be supported by every country, the spokesperson said, including major plastic producers and consumers. Matt Seaholm, chief executive of a business group called Plastics Industry Association, says the U.S. is doing a very good job of trying to balance all of the interests of different stakeholders. The U.S. government has positioned itself well to drive forward a workable consensus-based agreement, Ross Eisberg, president of another industry group called America's Plastic Makers, said in a statement. It's a pivotal moment in the negotiations. The world produces about 400 million metric tons of plastic waste every year, according to the United Nations Environment Program, roughly the weight of every human on the planet. Most of it ends up in places like oceans, shorelines, and landfills, where it breaks down into tiny pieces called microplastics that have been found in every corner of the environment and inside human bodies. The problem is getting worse. The amount of plastic waste the world produces is expected to almost triple in the coming decades, with less than a fifth recycled, according to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. So in 2022, countries agreed to negotiate a legally binding agreement to end plastic pollution. With months to go before a deadline to hash out the treaty, interest groups on all sides of the issue say this is a pivotal moment. The last round of negotiations in Kenya ended in deadlock. Afterward, environmental groups warned the talks were at risk of collapsing after some oil and gas-producing countries blocked a final decision on how to move forward. The negotiations are happening at a time when the oil and gas industry increasingly sees petrochemicals as a core part of their business. Efforts to limit the risk from climate change threaten demand for fossil fuels, but oil and gas demand for petrochemicals is expected to keep rising for years. Industry analysts say. Magnus Levold, a policy advisor at the Norwegian Academy of International Law, says fossil fuel producers including Russia, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Iran, and Bahrain want this process to fail. An observer at the negotiations, Levold adds, the reason for that is that these countries, they have huge oil production. They have a considerable petrochemical industry, so they see that regulation of plastics is a threat to their economic interest. The U.S. is a giant in those same industries. Booming production of American natural gas has propelled plastic manufacturing around the world. Last year, the country produced, consumed, and exported a record amount of ethane, which is used in plastic manufacturing and almost always comes from natural gas when it is produced in the U.S. Experts who have met with the State Department and who have attended the talks say U.S. negotiators could be handcuffed by domestic politics. It could be probably impossible for the Biden administration to convince 2/3 of the Senate to approve a plastics treaty, says Levold of the Norwegian Academy of International Law. The U.S. government does not want to be the bad guy, says Erica Nunez, head of the Ocean Foundation's Plastic Initiative, who has consulted with the State Department. I think they do really want to come out of this with some wins, and I think they're very challenged right now in identifying what those wins are realistically within the U.S. context. Against the backdrop of booming fossil fuel production, U.S. negotiators at the talks have declined to back a binding global agreement, say the state attorneys general and environmental advocates who have attended the talks. Instead, they say the U.S. has sought an accord that would leave countries free to decide for themselves how to clean up plastic pollution. The U.S. is really trying to reshape what could be a binding global treaty with binding global targets into a ground-up treaty where every country just says, all right, this is what we're willing to do, says Moffett of the Center for International Environmental Law, and this is inadequate. A State Department spokesperson said the agreement needs to include universal obligations. but that overly prescriptive approaches could dissuade countries that are big producers and consumers of plastic from joining. Countries should be able to meet their obligations in ways that take into account their respective priorities and circumstances, the spokesperson said. The plastic industry says cutting production is off limits. The plastic industry is fighting on two fronts to block treaty provisions that could constrain manufacturing. It is trying to stop countries from limiting how much new plastic is produced, and it opposes global regulations on the chemicals that companies use. Scientists and environmental advocates say that to make a significant dent in plastic pollution, countries have to cut how much new plastic they manufacture. But plastic makers and the oil and gas industry, which includes national oil companies and publicly traded corporations, say the world needs all the plastic they can produce, and the negotiators should focus on creating a so-called circular economy where plastic is recycled and reused to prevent waste. The industry is making that argument at the same time it tries to fend off scrutiny. Of a decades-long controversial campaign to sell recycling to the public, investigations included by NPR have shown the plastics industry promoted recycling even though officials long knew that it probably wouldn't work on a large scale. Former industry officials have said the goal was to avoid regulations and ensure demand for plastic kept growing. Current officials have said those investigations don't accurately portray today's industry. We fully and readily admit that we don't recycle enough plastic, says Seaholm of the Plastic Industry Association, but what we're saying is we want to recycle more. The industry is putting billions of dollars into recycling technologies that get us where we need to be. Seaholm says the industry also supports policies to encourage recycling, like making producers help pay for recycling or infrastructure and requiring companies to use some recycled material in plastic products. A lot of experts say recycling will have to be part of the solution because plastic is ingrained in modern life. But they say governments need to regulate manufacturing for recycling to work. The Business Coalition for a Global Plastics Treaty, which includes major brands like Coca-Cola, Unilever, and Walmart, is called for governments to phase out problematic plastics that are hard to recycle or that are likely to end up as waste in the environment. A State Department spokesperson said the U.S. is advocating for measures to reduce demand for new plastic, including through government procurement policies. However, the spokesperson said countries wouldn't be stopped from also trying to limit the supply of new plastic. A lot of countries want to do with the caps on manufacturing. Reducing demand for new plastic is great, says Nunez of the Ocean Foundation, but we still need to directly implement policies to limit fossil fuel extraction, which is something that the U.S. is avoiding, she says. As for the chemicals that go into plastic, industry representatives say they should be regulated by national governments, not by a global treaty on plastic pollution. But as scientists and environmental advocates calling for global chemical regulations know that plastic waste and the chemicals it's made from doesn't stay in the country where it's produced. It floats down rivers and around oceans. To protect people and the environment, governments are part of the High Ambition Coalition to end plastic pollution include the European Union, Canada, and the United Kingdom, as well as a number of developing countries from Rwanda and Maldives, want to eliminate and restrict hazardous plastics and chemicals globally. They also want to force companies to disclose information about the chemicals they use. We have the evidence to show that human health and environmental health are being impacted, says Suzanne Brander, an ecotoxicologist at Oregon State University, who was on a call recently with the State Department discussing the plastics treaty. If we can't get enough information on what's being used, she adds, we have no way of truly making these products safer. Lawmakers and observers warn of industry influence. But groups advocating for aggressive global rules say there's been little progress in the negotiations. After more than a year of talks, governments still haven't come up with a plan that has the ambition and strength to limit plastic production and cut down on pollution. The group of State Attorney General wrote to the State Department earlier this month. The group faulted the U.S. delegation for taking a position that lacks concrete objectives or standards. The United States has the power to persuade and to be forward-leaning, says Margaret Spring, a chief conservative Conservation and Science Officer at the Monterey Bay Aquarium, who has consulted with the State Department on the Plastics Treaty and is leading a delegation at the talks of the International Science Council. Right now, you've seen other countries doing that, and so that's been disappointing to many of us. Negotiators face intense lobbying from groups that have big financial stakes in the plastics industry. The influence of plastic producers and petrochemical companies is one of the largest barriers to strong action. A group of Democrat lawmakers, as well as Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, an independent, and Mohammed Khatami, a member of the European Parliament, wrote recently to Biden and leaders of the UN and European Commission. Ahead of this week's negotiations in Canada, the industry said it would be a mistake to talk much about manufacturing. Certainly, there are those in the Biden administration who would like to see some much more aggressiveness policies toward our industry, which we certainly don't agree with, says C. Holm of the Plastic Industry Association. But there are those who are truly honest brokers that we're continuing to work with.